Hi, this is Adam Seaman. I am the founder of Positive Leadership, and I'm an organizational development consultant. Today, I'm going to talk about something that makes us unique in our approach to working with organizations. It's a philosophy that we call progression theory. This will be a little introduction to some of the foundational concepts involved with it, what it is, why it matters, and a little bit about where it came from. The first place to begin with progression theory is, why do we focus on progress? And to help with that, I like to compare it to perfection, that most of us have a perfectionistic way of thinking. And the way we define perfection matters here. Most people may not think of themselves as perfectionists. What we mean by perfectionism is what's in our head for the way we think things should be. So when we experience things that are against the way we think it should be, we'll experience disappointment. What we're experiencing, you could say, is against what we had in our head. Or another way of saying against would be contra, or the word contrast. So we'll talk about contrast today. We'll also talk about the opposite of contrast, which is alignment. And this is at the core of organizational dynamics and actually all relationships is, how do we deal with contrast? How do we deal with things that aren't the way we think they should be? And this is also the domain of leadership. That leadership, what I'm saying here is that leadership is the activity of starting with contrast and moving it in the direction of alignment. And I say it very deliberately, in the direction of alignment, because what we want to do is make progress in a direction. We are not trying to make progress to a specific destination. Direction versus destination is a key difference between progression thinking and perfectionistic thinking, because when we have a very specific destination in mind and at the exclusion of all other possibilities, that's a perfectionism. That's costly. That can lead to problems down the road. So what we're trying to do with progression theory is introduce a way of thinking. So as I talk through this, there's going to be some concepts with some explanations. And really what it is an idea fashion show. I'm actually just going to walk some ideas down the runway, and you should listen and see if it fits for you. And then you could do one of three things. You could accept it, you could reject it, or you could adapt it. That's your choice. Mine is that I want to walk these ideas down the runway because I think they're absolutely essential. And they're the ideas that really make up this theory, this idea we call progression theory. So just to kind of sum it up though real quick, what I like to say is that perfection is never possible. I think we can all agree on that. But also true is that progression is always possible. So progression is never possible, but progression is always possible. And that's one of the reasons I like focusing on it, is it gives us agency. It gives us the capacity to make change in the right direction. Whereas if we can never achieve perfection, then we'll never be satisfied. So progression is what this is about. So to start, what I'd like to do is talk about three key concepts that make up progression theory: thriving, alignment, and engagement. These three words, I know they're out there in the world and we all have ideas about what they mean. I'm going to go to the origins of the words. Where do they come from? Where do they begin? So I'm going to start with thriving. What I'll explain is that in order to get to thriving, we need to have a state of alignment. That I'm just going to spoil the plot. Thriving is the result of the necessary factors being in alignment. If the necessary factors are in alignment, then thriving will result. And if the necessary factors are not in alignment, they're in contrast, and thriving will not result. In order to have the right factors in alignment, we need to spend our resources in the right way. And that's what I mean by engage. So the real sequence, even though I'm going to talk about it in reverse, is that when we engage our resources or direct or spend our resources to align the factors that are necessary for thriving, then thriving will be the result. So engage, align, thrive becomes really important. Let's start with thrive and work our way backwards. I like to go to the original, the etymology of a word. It helps me. There's so much to it. It's not just a geeky nerd thing. Words are codes, and we need to know the origin of where they came from. So you'll see what I mean here when we talk about the word thrive, which we see everywhere. And we generally use it correctly. I mean, thriving means to grow or develop well, or grow or develop vigorously. Another way to say it would be to flourish. The French word for flower, flourish, or prosper is another way to say it. Prosper is another way of saying thriving. Another way to think of thriving would be as success, or I think of it as health, a state of health. So these are all ways to think of thriving and define it. But what I like to do is go to the origin of the word. And what we learn is that it comes from the Norse language. I think Vikings when I hear Norse. And the word thriving was originally, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I like to say thrifa. I think it sounds fun to say thrifa. And I like to clench my fist when I say it, because what does thrifa mean? It means to grasp or to get hold of or to seize for oneself. I think that is really the kind of tone that's needed for us to thrive. That thriving isn't just happiness, because happiness comes from the word happenstance, haphazard, happy. It means random or luck. And yes, if I am living in the world and the world brings me something that I want, then I should feel lucky. I should feel happy. That's great. But I don't think that is seizing for oneself. I think that it implies kind of luck, or you're waiting for it. It's just kind of got to happen. And thriving is about going out and making it happen. So progression theory really is the practice of thriving. That's really what we're talking about, is how to thrive. And thriving is what we all want. When you think about what people want for anything they care about, their children, their health, their bank account, their community, their workplace, whatever someone cares about, I know what they want for it. It's universal. I call thriving the universal outcome, because that's what people want for the things they care about. They want those things to grow. They want those things to develop. They want them to prosper, flourish, succeed, and be healthy. That's what we want. And so that's what we want for our organizations. So I think of thriving within organizations. What does it mean for them to grow or develop well or vigorously, to be healthy, to flourish, to prosper, succeed? And in order for us to thrive, in order for that to happen, then what we need is to make sure all the factors that are necessary for thriving are aligned. I want to explain something else about what thriving is. So to do that, I'm going to use something we call the alignment meter. The alignment meter is just a very simple model that describes how we can respond to anything in our environment. If this is my environment and I'm living in my environment, and my environment is made up of many things, there's many things. There's relationships, there's objects, there's community, there's all sorts of things in my environment if I really look closely. And what will happen is some of those things, they'll align with you. Some of those things are great. You're like, I love it. This thing around me. I love this object. I love this relationship. I love this appliance. I love this service that I get. But then other times there will be things around us that conflict with us or contrast with us. So our environment can be made up of a mixture of things of contrast and alignment. What we want to do is we want to maximize our alignment and minimize our contrast. Does that make sense? So when that happens, we increase what I call our individual environment fit, that there's a fit between the individual and their environment. That to me is what happiness is. That's a better way, in my view, to think of happiness. It's more syllables and it's a little more nuanced, but individual environment fit is what we all want. And the reason I like calling it that is because what would fit for you as an individual will be completely different for another person. This is what happens in families and things like that. We see it all the time. I'm a unique individual, and in this environment, my ratio of contrast to alignment is different from you in the exact same environment. Does that make sense? That's what we're trying to do here, is understand this basic thing, and that what we want to do is minimize contrast and increase alignment, because that's the pathway to thriving. Contrast is the state in which one or more related elements here function suboptimally, and the outcomes move away from thriving. That's a little more complicated, but what I'm saying is the reason you're experiencing contrast is because elements in your environment are not functioning well together. And so you're lessened by it. Other elements in your environment are lessened by it until you address the contrast. And that's what we're trying to do. But perfectionism would say we should never even have contrast to begin with. And progression says, no, we start with contrast and we make incremental gains in the direction of alignment. So on the left side of this meter, what we have is contrast, which, as I said earlier, means against. Against what? Against what you want, against alignment, against what thriving would be. And what we want to do is move in the direction of alignment. So the alignment meter is just a very simple way of saying, what's the level of alignment or contrast between you and something else? I mean, if I hold up different items, or if you look around your room, you could look at something and go, oh, I like that painting. That I would rate that a 75. Or, oh, there's that old photo of me from back in the day, and I don't like that. It brings back bad memories. That's a contrast. So my alignment level is about a 25. You could be able to do that with each of your relationships with people around you. You could almost say it, or different foods. Oh, I love this food. I thrive when I eat that. I'm feeling great. I feel strong, energized. I want to keep going. Versus when I'm feeling contrast, I feel weak. I feel drained. I wish I could do something else, So suffering is when the contrast is so great that we're overwhelmed by it. So the way I like to think of it is capacity to demand ratio. Demand is like a downward pressure on us. I think of like weightlifting, like I'm doing a military press, and the contrast would be the weight on me. That's the demand on me. And my strength level would be the capacity I have to meet that demand. So some physical suffering is when the physical demand far exceeds the physical capacity. Financial suffering would be when the financial demand far exceeds the financial capacity. Emotional suffering would be when the emotional demand exceeds the emotional capacity. So it's a demand to capacity ratio. When that demand is so overwhelming, we don't have the capacity to meet it, then we suffer. So what we need to do is work on strengthening our capacity and lessening the demand. And as we do, we make progress. We move from suffering to struggling. And struggling may not be a picnic. It doesn't sound great. I don't enjoy it, but it's a far better situation than suffering. And it takes progress to get there, but it happens. And we've all maybe been there, where how did we get out of suffering? Did we go from here all the way to here overnight? No, we didn't. We had to move and grind and adjust. And struggle is really valuable, because struggling is nature's catalyst for growth. That's what struggle is. Anytime you've grown, anytime your children have grown, anytime your business has grown, it's because you met a struggle and you overcame it. That's how we grow. That's how muscles grow. That's literally how they grow. You have to strain them, and then they repair and they grow, and that's the process. But then you kind of get past this 50% point marker or the 50-yard line. And we start to get into traction. If we keep going, the struggle becomes traction. Traction is this sense of gripping, is this sense of making forward motion, is a sense of momentum. And it didn't start at the 50, it started back here in the work we did to get here. But now we can start to see the gains, and hopefully we've experienced that more and more often as we go through life. We experience more and more traction. And what I'm showing here would be, what is the art of making this progress? It's not accidental, it's deliberate. And progression theory seeks to spell it out. And ultimately, we want to get to a state of thriving, but none of these are permanent states, even thriving. So we have to also maintain it. This will fluctuate all the time, this meter. So it's just a tool, it's a mind tool to help to see where we're at. And so what we want to do is make the journey. Wherever we start, we want to make the journey toward thriving. And that's what progression theory is. It's the journey toward thriving. What you can also see here is the key to thriving is alignment. So we'll talk about that next. I just want to show you one more thing. I call this the BEST model. And the only reason is because it's an acronym. We have the beginning and the ending. That's the B and the E. And then we have survival and thriving. That's the S and the T. So that's the only reason I call it the BEST model, is just because of the letters. But what this is really about is everything. Everything in existence has a beginning, and everything in existence will have an ending, whether it's individual life, a relationship, a country, a planet, a star. It's just a matter of time. And I know it's an oversimplification, but what I want to say is the distances between beginning and ending, there's really only two states. And I know I'm oversimplifying that, but I'm trying to kind of reduce it. I'm saying that you have basically two states. You've either been in a state of survival or a state of thriving. And they have many levels. So there's many levels of survival. There's certainly better levels of survival. And then there's the bare bones level of survival. But if you fall below a certain level of survival, then you're no longer surviving. And what we would much rather do is spend our time in the zone of thriving. And there's many levels of thriving too. And you may not have reached your own levels of thriving. I mean, for me personally, I'm experiencing a state of thriving I didn't know I would have. I didn't expect to have. It's because of progress. It truly is. There's way more to it than that, but the progress in the right areas, not just any area, progress in the right areas, or what I call the factors necessary, is what leads to thriving. So that's the thriving aspect. There's a lot more to say on it, but that's the key components. And so if we want thriving, then we need alignment. And so that's where I focus on. Yes, I want this as my destination. I want thriving as my destination, but alignment is what I need to focus on to get there. So I similarly will go to the etymology of alignment then as we talk about alignment. But alignment is the arrangement in a straight line or the correct, appropriate relative positions. And that's really what I want to focus on. That all the different elements needing to come together to make up a state of thriving, they're all in the right alignment. They're all in the right configuration. They're all in the right relationship. And each of these individually is in the right condition too. And as we have that, then that leads to thriving. And part of the work and what these tools are meant to do is encourage us to learn how to think this way, to look for, well, what are the factors? What are these things that we need to think about? Because there's a lot of things that you don't need to think about. There's a lot of distractions or things that don't really matter for thriving and at the expense of the things that really do matter. Baked in all of this is discernment or judgment or the right read of reality, and then getting those things into alignment. So alignment is the right positioning of things. I like this too, a position of agreement or alliance. And that kind of implies people and relationships, but I mean of things too, that these things are in agreement and they're in alliance and they work together to move in the right direction, to create the right effect. A lot of our work involves in surfacing and identifying, well, what are those factors necessary for thriving to result? And so, what I want to show you then next is a little worksheet that describes all of this together. So, for thriving, I want to look at box 1 and 2. In this box, we want to state the focus and why it matters, which is another way of saying purpose. At Positive Leadership, our definition of purpose is what is the focus and why does it matter? So we want to answer those questions. Part A, what is the focus? Part B, why does it matter? And together, A plus B equals purpose. Once we have that, we could define thriving. We could say, well, if that's our purpose, what would growth look like? What would success look like? What would well-being look like? And so those are our outcomes. Thriving is the outcome we want. The universal outcome for everybody is thriving. But what does it mean for our focus? What does it mean for our focus to grow, succeed, and be healthy? Why does that matter? And then we spell out all the details that make up our outcomes. And there could be many. Like the outcomes could be quantitative, measurable. They could be qualitative, things you describe. The outcomes could be little small things that you want, little details, or they could be big, larger, overarching themes that you want to realize. It's all of that, and collectively, people might call that the vision. But a vision is made up of many, many pixels, and the pixels are these individual outcomes. So we just talk about outcomes. We don't talk about vision. We don't talk about mission. We talk about purpose. For us, we say purpose instead of mission, and we say outcomes instead of vision. We say outcomes instead of goals. We say outcomes instead of milestones because it gets really messy. So we're very clear. We're about purpose and outcomes. And thriving is the relationship between them. You can see people that have amazing outcomes. They're rich, they're beautiful, they're popular, they're powerful, and they're absolutely miserable. They're suffering because those outcomes don't match their purpose. That's why. When our outcomes are in the opposite direction of our purpose, when our outcomes are over here, instead of over here in the direction of thriving, see, let's put purpose right here at the center of this model. Purpose is right there at the point. When our outcomes are in the opposite direction, we suffer. But when our outcomes are aligned with our purpose, we thrive.